Okay, so Dan, thank you for joining us today. Before we start, I just want to get for the record that we have your consent to use any of the conversation that we discussed for public content.
Yes, you have it.
Great, wonderful. So let's kind of begin by you telling me why you decided to join this conversation, what your background is in education.
Well, I could go for a long way on that question in a number of different directions. So, IDEA is especially important to me. I am a special ed teacher. This is my 19th year teaching in Franklin Township in Somerset County as a special ed teacher. I teach fourth and fifth grade resource center. It's the town where I grew up, and it's the town where my brother received special education services. And that has made him into the person that he is today, successful, functional member of society. And that's where I'm proud of what I have done as an educator to help my students over the many years do the same. So, that's why it's personal for me, but it's also personal for all of the members who I'm fortunate enough to represent. I am the president of the Somerset County Education Association. We have nearly 7,000 members. Not all of them are special education teachers, but all of them are affected directly or indirectly by special education. And I like to say that, if you didn't go to school to become a special education teacher, you went to get into education in some other way. Well, guess what? You're in special education whether you know it or not, because all of us at some point in our careers become special education service providers in one way or another.
I definitely agree with that. That's funny because, education's my second career. So when I was researching what certification I wanted, I was like, well, I might as well go for special ed because it's going to be needed anyways. I knew back then, and I'd been in the classroom not quite as long as you, but almost as long. So even back then, we knew the importance of special education. So you're a resource teacher like I am, and I know in my district we're not the highest funded district. We do a lot with, not so many resources. So I was trying to think of some concrete examples of what it would look like if we lost IDEA funding in school. And I'm wondering if you've had those thoughts and what you think it's going to look like.
All of us should be thinking about what that is going to look like. But before we can even get to that, let's talk about the starting point, where we're coming from going into this. IDEA has been underfunded since its inception, what, more than 50 years ago? Last year, I think it was funded, or this current school year, I think it has been funded at about 17% of special education services are provided by IDEA. The law says it's supposed to be 40% are funded by IDEA. We have never, ever gotten anywhere close to that 40% number. And I'm not sure if 17% is a record high, but it's pretty close to it. So we are getting nowhere near the funding for special education services right now before the Musk Trump administration does anything to it. We're not getting anywhere near what the law says our students deserve, what our schools deserve. We have vacancies that have a compounding, damaging effect in our schools right now. I'll give you an example. So I work at McAfee Road School. It's the same school that I attended as a child. I have gone absolutely nowhere in life. And um, right now we have it's a small building. We have I think 10 special ed teaching positions. We're a little bit better this year, but last year at one point it looked like we were going to have 4 vacancies out of those 10 special ed positions. So what effect does that have in the rest of the department and the rest of the building? It means that classes are uncovered. It means that they're being taught by subs when they can get them. And if you can get subs, which is not a guarantee, and if those subs are really good and effective, which is also not always a guarantee, they can be only in that placement for 40 days before they're not allowed to be there anymore and they have to rotate out. So we have in my building what we call the 40-day shuffle, where subs like every time they get their feet under them and things start really cooking with the class, by statute, they can no longer work in that placement. We have to get somebody else. So that is just a little bit of what happens. But when all of that is going on, the veteran teachers, the academic coaches, the administration, we're all pushing into those classrooms all the time, whether it's in our schedule or during our prep or during our lunch or before school or what have you, after school, working with either a less experienced teacher or a long-term sub or a body du jour, if the case may be, to try and show them how to do an effective job for the kids who are there. It is far from an ideal environment, but we all pitch in to do what we can. That creates an additional workload for all of us. It creates an additional stress for all of us. It creates an additional risk of burnout. And then that means even more people leaving the profession. And then that compounds the problem, and it's this vicious cycle. So that is where we are right now before they have even cut another dollar from IDEA. So now the state of New Jersey, I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe we get somewhere between 800 million and $1 billion for IDEA funding right now in this current year. If you take that federal funding for IDEA away, then one of two things can happen, and really one thing can happen. One, the state can make up the difference, which is highly unlikely to happen. And two, the district just has to cut millions of dollars, depending on the size of your district and the size of your district's budget. It could be basically like a 3% cut for overall funding for each district. And yeah, that comes from the special ed department, but districts have to move things around and move money around to make up the difference so that they're still providing services to their special ed students, at least to the level that parents can't sue them for not following IEPs. And so special education sees a cut, but some money gets shifted over from other programming, and all of that programming receives a cut. We're going to see reductions in staff across the board, not just in special ed, for these reasons. And we know that the number one most important resource that any district has is its people, the educators who provide instruction and everything that our students need. So I wish I had some rosier outlook, some way to say, oh no, it'll be fine, we'll withstand it, everything's going to be okay. I don't know that I can say that, sadly, because it would be one thing if we were coming from a place where IDEA was fully funded. It has never been that way. We always know in education that we are always doing more with less. And now we're going to deal with a whole lot less than what we're used to. And that is going to make a real difference, not only for students who are going to see a reduced level of services from what they're used to, but also from the staff who are already at their wits' end, who are going to be made to do that much more.
Yeah, so you went into a thought that I haven't had a conversation about yet, which is how other programs will be impacted to try and make up some of these costs, right? So I teach in a resource room as well. It's not a lot of high needs, like I don't need communication systems for the students. I don't need, additional technology programs, but there are certain accommodations that they have that is going to overall impact the full budget of the school, right? So one of those things for my students is just a copy of the notes, right? But
Mm.
if, thinking along the lines of the point that you raised, that all of our other resource budgets are kind of cut to make up and try and keep some of the special education staff, then our paper budget might be cut, and then I wouldn't be able to make all those copies for the students. Like something just as small as that, which doesn't seem as a big deal, is now potentially on the chopping block with this.
We're already in a situation where our funding priorities are upside down. I work in a school that has bulletproof glass doors and windows, but no tissues. So that tells us where our starting point is with our priorities. And, just looking at my own practice as an educator, every Friday morning, I get to school early, I make all my copies for the next week. And that way I'm done, it's good to go. What if we can't do that because we run out of paper in April? And then there isn't enough paper for the district, for the staff in my building to make the copies that we need in May and June, what do we do then? Like, yes, I will adapt as a teacher, as a professional. I will find something else to do. It won't be as effective. It'll be just another way in which we're doing more with less. Those things could be real possibilities. That's just one concrete example that you gave with paper. But all those little things add up. It's like death by a thousand cuts. So, you know, where do we go from there? What is the straw that really breaks everyone's back? It's going to vary person to person. When does a person say, an educator say, I can't do this anymore. I can't spend more of my own money on things like paper and markers and tissues. I can't give more of my time to make up for the things that I don't have. I can't give more of my time to help out these other educators who are struggling because I'm already giving every moment that I have and I need to eat lunch sometimes. So, like, what is the breaking point? It's going to differ for all of us, but with every little thing that happens incrementally, a few more people reach that breaking point. So that is what is really scary about that because the more of them that do, the more of them that get there, the fewer of us there are. We know that teacher education programs are not creating as many new teachers. They're not getting anywhere near enough prospective educators into the profession to fill the demand for what we need. So I don't know what that looks like. And my real fear, and this might become more of a state issue depending on who becomes the next governor and what their priorities are. Right now we already have so many vacancies, they might just say, well, the sky hasn't fallen yet with all of these vacancies, so we'll just take away whatever money you are using, you have bookmarked for these vacant positions, and now poof, no more vacancies. And that's just whatever you have now becomes the new normal, and we're no longer even trying to fill those positions. That's going to be more of a state issue. But compounding with the federal issue, where I think I saw the numbers like 5.3% of education funding in New Jersey comes from the federal government, which is, a large part of that is IDEA. Well, it's going to make it untenable for us to continue with the high quality education standards that our students deserve and that we're accustomed to.
There's so many like side conversations we could have right now from everything that you just said, right? You said death of a thousand cuts, right? And that was a theme from it was G2 Brown and his parent organizing group up in Chicago. And we know what happened in Chicago schools, right? We know schools
Hmm.
were closed, community neighborhood schools were closed, for-profit charter schools were brought in, right? So that's a whole conversation, especially with all of the signal that the federal government is doing around the voucher system. We talked about colleges, right? So the big concern of colleges right now is the research funding, right? And they're having serious conversations about having to stop a lot of their research programs, who some of those programs were tangential funding of some of the college courses that they offered to students, right? So the implications and the ripple out effect from that. But I want to kind of pull it back a little. So you said you've been teaching for 19 years. Can you think about a time where there were services that a student need or a student wasn't yet classified, and it was a fight to get them the services they need, and what that kind of might have looked like for the student before they received the services and then after they received the services, even whether one of your students or you also mentioned your brother, if you can think about a story around that.
Yeah, there are a number of different examples that come to mind. I won't single out specifically any individual students that I've had, but certainly things like a push for a one-to-one paraprofessional that a student needs. That is very, very difficult to get always because that's, administrators look at it from a financial side. Bringing in another paraprofessional means another salary plus benefits. At least in my district, I know there are some districts where paraprofessionals are paid hourly and don't receive benefits. That is just an absolute tragedy, and it's unconscionable. But fortunately, in my district, they do have salary and benefits. So giving a student a one-to-one para pulls a para from somewhere else, and the district is looking at it from the standpoint of, all right, that's salary plus benefits for another person, and where am I going to find this person, and so on. So there have been a lot of fights like that for individual students who needed that one-to-one support. It's documented by um, evidence spanning, academic and social emotional evaluations done by the child study team, or medical documentation provided by their doctors. And it's very, very difficult to do. And now it's going to be just about impossible. So those are just some of the examples of things that I've seen over the years, in, fights to try to get services for students. And an issue that will come about, or that exists, that will just be exacerbated, is that often when it comes to special ed services, the squeaky wheel gets greased. Parents that push extra hard for certain services, bring in an advocate, threaten litigation, are far more likely to get those services than parents who, either or cannot or will not, or don't have the resources, or the wherewithal to be able to do that for the child. So it doesn't necessarily come down to who needs what the most. It comes down to whose families and advocates are willing to fight for it the most. That's just going to become, even worse. I mean, I've had a number of parents or families in my career who've been pushing for services for the child that I don't believe that they needed, and that the school didn't believe that they needed. They often ended up getting them anyway because it's cheaper than going to court. So that take will end up taking away from even more students who do need those resources, whose families are not able to fight for them. Thinking of my brother. So my brother is 30. Hold on, I should know this. He's 38 now. So it has been a while since he has been in special education. He is autistic, and let me say this, he's doing great right now. He lives on his own. He is able to like handle his own household chores and functions, and shopping and all of that. He sings and plays guitar for kindergarten and preschool students, some some virtually, some in person. And just like that is what he loves to do. He just loves performing sing along songs for kids. So he's doing great right now. That was far from a certainty when he was a kid, when he was in special ed. Now, I'm only 3 years older than him, so my recollections of this are, through the lens of someone who was a kid myself at the time. But when he was diagnosed with autism in 1989, no one ever heard of it. You know, the he got the diagnosis. My mother went to the library and said, "Give me all the books you have on autism." There were two of them. That's it. That's it. Our primary care provider, our pediatrician, kicked us out of the practice because they said we do. Oh, they said Danny can stay, but my brother could not stay because they don't treat kids like that. Obviously, my mother pulled us both out of the practice and got us with a better pediatrician. But that was what the world was like back then. Education was a similar. It was similar. We didn't have autism programs in public schools. They didn't exist yet in the early 90s. And my mother was one of those parents who was a fierce advocate, and she got them to create resources for my brother because they didn't have the resources that he needed. He was even educated in an ESL class. It was called ESL at the time, even though English was his first language, because they were like, well, we don't have anything else that really suits him, so let's give this a shot. I think he was the first, possibly the only native English speaking student in New Jersey history to be in an ESL class. So, like, they were just throwing things at the wall to try and see what fits. And now, of course, we have a lot more, a lot greater understanding, culturally, medically, certainly educationally, of what our autistic students need. And we have come so far since then, over the last, 30, 35 years. I would hate to see us give back those gains for our students who need those services, not for lack of knowledge, not for lack of understanding of what they need, but for lack of funding to throw us back into the special ed dark ages. And we know that even further, further back in the 60s and 70s, if you had special needs, you were basically just sent into a warehouse. That's a human rights violation. It's unconscionable, but that is what they did. And it is my fear that there are bad actors in government who would like to see us go back to that because forget the impact on individuals and students and families. It's cheaper, and that's really all that they care about. So if you take IDEA away and then you take state funding away, again, depending on whether or not we elect a governor who understands the priorities of New Jerseyans, when you take and you take and you take, that is what we get closer to going back to. We get closer to going back to the way things were in the early 90s for my brother. We get closer to going back to those warehouses from the 60s and 70s. And we know better now. We just don't have people in office who give a damn about those priorities. It's just looking at it from a financial perspective and not from a human perspective.
Something we've fought against, you and I, side by side in New Jersey and
Yes.
nationally for years, right? Making sure that we recognize that education is about human beings and about students. Um, there's just so much going on right now. So as you were talking about, the concerns about warehousing of special education students again, I was thinking about what's going on with the Department of Health at the
Mhm.
federal level right now. And I don't know if you saw the Make America Healthy Again program, the components of what they want to do. And one of those things that really concerned me was kind of a reanalysis of the different medications that people need for ADHD and other areas, the SSRIs. Um, so all of this, and I think there was even part of a conversation about moving the Department of Education into the Department of Health, and it's just overall very concerning. And, like you said, depending upon our next governor, um, we really do need somebody in place that will protect our public education system. We've seen what has happened in other states to, their school systems when there has not been that support of public education. I don't know, any final thoughts about the future that you want to share?
I think I've been depressing enough. Um, let me try and leave on somewhat of an uplifting note here. We have an opportunity to fight back. We have an obligation to fight back. We don't have to accept any of this without pushing back with all of our might. The more and more that they take from us, the more that they take from our students, the harder we have to fight back. Now, what does that actually look like? That can look differently depending on who you are and what you do, but it looks different. It looks differently for all of us, but it's incumbent upon all of us to resist and push back for common sense in whatever way we can. That could be with writing, that could be with podcasting, it could be with doing what we're doing here. It could be with literally joining a protest or starting a support group to talk about these things. It could be with having conversations with neighbors, friends, relatives who might not understand the real impact of what is happening, and they certainly might not be getting it from whatever news they consume. It could be writing letters or calling or emailing your legislators and encouraging and imploring them to resist, or if they're currently doing it, to continue resisting, depending on who represents you. Um, it could just be daring to advocate for your kids, to advocate for your students, to advocate for your coworkers. It could be through your union and different initiatives we have here in the union that support equity and justice work. It could be in any number of ways. Everyone needs to look at their own lives, their own skills, their own experiences, and reflect on what they can do to push back. There are any number of resources online of support groups of people who are organizing right now and using this as an organizing opportunity and a rallying cry. And you don't have to do anything or start anything yourself. Find like-minded people and jump on board. Whatever it is that you can do, you must do. We are at that point. We are at an inflection point in our history, and it's up to us. It's up to all of us to resist, to fight back, to do what we do, to stand up for our profession and our students and our country.
I definitely agree with that. And I think it's important for people to recognize that, taking care of yourself and being healthy and, it's overwhelming. There are so many avenues. Pick a lane, stay in it, work hard in it, but make sure you take, some time for yourself for rest. I'm gonna coin Tom Morello's phrase. What's he say? He says, take it easy, but take it.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Yes, do what you can do, but don't do more than you can do because we need each and every one of us for the long haul. This is not a short-term battle. Know when you need to unplug and then do it for your mental health and for your sanity, and then keep going. Just keep facing another day and keep resisting in whatever way and whatever capacity you can.